This is the End of the Road podcast with your host, Michael Coco. Exploring the horizons we never touch because we're already there. Welcome, and thanks for listening. Tonight we're off to Costa Rica to speak with Kuma from the Ikara Retreat Center. But to my mind, Ikara feels much more like a village than a retreat center, as you're going to hear. And to my mind, it also doesn't feel like a place like so many retreat centers where you go on to your own individual journey of self-discovery. It's something that is much more mysterious, and where you set aside the metaphors of Carl Jung and Freud that you're going to have individuation or integration or self-discovery and step into something much more mysterious, perhaps. Not so much a self, but a porosity, and not so much an integration, but a reconciliation and a myriad of possessions. Or to use Kuma's words, Bwete is the reflection of God. It is not a system, it is whole and a spirituality in true vernacular. Spirituality being the only omnipresent representation one can experience. And without further ado, here's Kuma to explore the wonderful world of Bwete. I sent you a Meister Eckhart quote. It's kind of a famous, Western mystical quote. The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. My eye and God's eye are one eye, one seeing, one knowing, one love.
Yeah, that there in itself is, it can be applied very much so to this true definition of spirituality according to like an ancient perspective is always, if we refer to Eastern philosophy, it's, one and many. We know these things. Vedic philosophies, very much the same thing. It's about the creator, God himself, inside each individual and everything that can be possibly known. And we are that. So everything is our reflection. That's very much so. God is me and he's also himself, and, vice versa. It's all the one thing. So we're obviously stationed as an individual on earth. Clearly you are individualized to a point, right? You're looking at your version of everything. So therefore we act in line with those principles, which is universal principles of cohesion and connection without severance and everything else. So that's why we're so almost militant in following these devotions and these things for one in many. It's why my work here revolves around me working without profit, because to us it's far more than that. The spirituality is about humanity, and the individual isn't he needs to realize that so he can be actually facilitating others and helping everyone. If everyone knew their Godhead with equality, there wouldn't be too much conflict. So this is henceforth why our tradition is existing, and it has been left in our mythology and truth by God himself, the tools of Iboga and the spirituality, to make people reconvene or reconnect to this principle of God himself, because there was almost a processional astronomical process that we're in all of the time, which is resulting in fragmentation of self. So back in the time when Bwete was existing, there was only wholeness, but today we have many contradictions in our life, and we've assigned our power to outside authorities, which is why the world, in our case, from our tradition, is in debauchery, as the person has lost their principle of connection to everything, to themselves. So, yeah, I definitely can say that term can be applied to the overall ethos of what we're trying to do here.
Sure, sure. And I almost was coming from it. You mind me getting a little mischievous?
Yeah, no problems at
Okay.
all. I don't
Okay.
mind.
So this is like I like to stir up some controversy. I don't. It's not controversy, but this idea that so uh, I have this image of that quote. I mean, it's a wonderful quote, but in a way, there's an aspect of separation about it because just look at it literally. The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. My eye and God's eye are one eye. That's still kind of like you there's still the mind working there, and it's like wanting to do equivalence and like to compare me with God and the same and
Uh-huh.
and what I wanted to get at is, and I'm sure Meister Eckhart has this wonderful epiphany and this revelation, and then the act of sort of writing it down loses some of the
Yeah.
magic. We can't. I guess what I want to point at or just kind of get at and jump into is that even to make this statement that Meister Eckhart is still in some ways missing it, perhaps. And I wanted to explore that in sort of your relationship to, you're not sitting asking my questions, you're down there, you're living it. You're not perhaps, or maybe I'm idealizing you, of course, but you're not, sitting there, well, now I'm God, now I'm not, now God's the same as me, now I'm not, I just I mean, you're just like,
Actually,
knee deep in it.
yeah, I can definitely say, I'll be brave enough to say it. I am that. That's not everyone's discovery because they're on the path to realizing. But the fact is when you find a true self-realization, like many sages talk about, when you truly find that, then all the thinking stops. Then you'll see how that is possible. And as a process, and that's what we educate people with here, because the person comes in with narratives and stories, but doesn't understand that the projection of thinking is their own, and they've created the story, the narrative. There's nothing to be done, in other words. So when that stops, only when that stops, and that's what I've worked with some people successfully over successions of treatment, to get to that point where the mind becomes quiet, and then we can realize creation, the interconnectedness of all things, because thinking, as you're rightly picking up on here with those quotes, thinking and the mind completely destroys the unknowable. So it separates. So the unknowable has to be lived, in other words. And I'm doing very little justice as well. I'm creating a parody, really, of my experience without thought. Sure. So yeah, for me, I've touched that void, and I live in that. And I can safely say that now. That's why I eventuated starting this work. It was only once I'd achieved or found myself with that awareness did I invest my time towards full-time spirituality and living in a monastic way. So I agree with you. I think, those comments when someone like Eckhart Tolle, it's not to critique him or say anything bad about him, but I was a huge reader of all the great psychoanalysts of our age, the ones that actually paved the way for him to throw those comments out there, but not once does he ever index his origins or appendix with reverence who gave him that knowledge. I don't see a lot of that, and that's a lot with a lot of these modern thinkers. So therefore, yeah, to me, for a spiritualist, we're kind of looking, there could be some dubiousness there, because really the man who's who really understanding the principles, it would be doing things a little differently. So it's easy to say these things, like, as you know, like saying it. I get a lot of people coming here trying to like intellectualize things and telling me that they know these things, but then they have an experience of wholeness through Iboga and they can't relate to anything all of a sudden. Yeah. So they've been living in narratives and not knowing, so in a supplicated authority on an outside power, which is not real. There isn't any authority. So,
yeah, no doubt.
So intellectuals, I had a lot of friends, even doctors doctors of philosophy come here, and to me, they're so lost in theories. It's you're creating them, right? Spiritualists know that it all stops, and we just live in harmony with all things, So, yeah, I agree. There's intellectual elements to, modern philosophies and rehashing ancient philosophies too, or tradition. So everyone in our village operates like my wife and I, like this. That's how we are. So it's much to do with like a similar thing going to a monastery in Tibet. People are there devoted to a one principle of wholeness, and that's their life work. Very much our village, how we run there. Living from the forest, using the medicines that God gave, never buying or using money to corrupt or divide man from man. Having people serve God on their knees and living harmoniously amongst the natural wilderness is the simple principles. So we're very proud of. I know I am. I feel gifted really to be involved with this village and my king, because I've been working around a lot before this, and there's nothing like this anywhere. It used to turn me away. I'd get involved with some others in this tradition, and I'd see straight away, this isn't really indigenous. This is just money grabbing, people using money and stuff. So I'm very proud of that. I'm there for humanity, and I can really safely say that now about myself. Perhaps I could not have said that 5 years ago. So, yeah, that's why I do this work tirelessly. Like I just finished a ceremonial week yesterday, and I absorb a lot of energies through these processes. Very strong, lots of spiritualized attacks and things on both my wife and I. And you kind of, after that, you really need to decompress, because the Western audience is rather sick, but they're not aware of it because of our immediate environments. We're not aware. We're just aware of the things that are popping up in our health, but we're not really aware of these attachments that are removed here. Which in the first evening, people all of a sudden, because of the removal, notice that they had that, but they don't know until they experience it. So it's very much all our process is very much about the individual discovering and unwinding without influence, but contained in a lane where they can't jump in and out, and learning the art form of non-attachment to actually accept what's happening. And then something like Iboga can instill great resolve in people if it's given the spiritualized way. If it's given in the direct way of the West and with a transactional approach, the results are minimal. They're not like our results here. I have a lot of people come from other Iboga retreats here nowadays, and from Gabon even, and they can't believe the difference. They have experienced the first night, and it instantly accesses what they bypassed in previous retreats. So that was an interesting journey to watch happen there, and it further convinced and affirmed to me that following my king and following this way it's a recipe for success in our particular direction.
So can you tell me a little bit of the difference about the serving God on his knees as you've described, and sort of the intellectual narrative approach of sort of a Western, and you mentioned the word transactional, but a different sort of approach? Go ahead.
Yeah. So you would like me to elaborate on that interaction? Do you mean?
Well, sure. Or how you mentioned the transactional approach, which I interpreted to be that you go to a retreat and are expecting something. There's a quid pro quo with, you're giving this and you're expecting to receive something, as opposed to a different sort of approach that is one maybe of service or relationship, perhaps, than reinforcing the self with something the self is going to try to gain.
Yes, for sure. In fact, people that call me here and want to come here, if I can see their psychology is, and they don't mean this, but their psychology is, I pay, I get, and this is a holiday and things, I'll gently show why they're really coming, because coming under those pretenses, I have a lot of experience with this, by the way, coming with those pretenses really disrupts the harmony of Iboga. It's very subtle, and that's what's happening in the West. It really requires someone who's devout to actually facilitate, to get those particular results. Iboga will always achieve something. Of course, it's a very powerful agent, but without the spirituality, it doesn't have application. It just has a Western pharmacological application of, I have a heart issue, I take it, takes it away. But that's that's been indoctrinated into all of us. This, I have a headache, I take paracetamol, sort of approach. It's very much spot fire fixing without addressing that something like a headache was actually caused by your incessant thinking. Or something, people don't notice their thinking and they wonder why they get random headaches, So yeah, the whole delivery, when people come and they know that and they are calibrated by the time they get here, they're instantly relaxed when they arrive and they feel our energy and know there's no pretense there. And the pretense is, if there's one, is that this is humanity and I believe I am those people as they are me. So they feel that, and then they start to feel really comfortable, and they adhere to suggestions as the best way to navigate this tradition and this plan. And they all have exceptional outcomes through that non-hierarchical sales point, which happens with selling traditions and plants. They understand, okay, this is me, and this is about my heart, and what is my health really worth to me? That's what I try to get them to really realize. Like, think about your own health here. Like, when they ask questions, to me, I'll also ask in return, how do you feel about your psychology presently? How do you feel about your physical functions? Not to pry or to try and analyze. On the contrary, it's to try and get them engaged with their relative issues rather than avoiding them. So, yes.
Oh no, I'm sorry. You had also mentioned the words spiritual attacks and attachments. Can you maybe describe a little bit about the nature of that and how those are encountered and related to?
Definitely, that's a great question. That the spiritual attack, the way we approach this when answering these questions with people, they need to see that. For me to pose a picture of the overall tradition of Bwete, it's a very ancient, 26,000-year-old process, right? And inside that, there was a lot of archaic, ancient knowledge back to esoteric Egypt, a lot of occultish information, like, the 3, 6, and 9 of creation, all sorts of things is in our tradition, the use of geometries and everything else. So it's such a powerful realm. So every time you contact anything to do with our tradition here, how we deliver it, it's loaded with an outcome that mimics Iboga. It wants unity and emancipation, and it's so strong that it won't tolerate fragmentary approaches, if that makes sense. It wants to heal what is whole. So the tradition is really, really about the individual feeling that. And these spiritual attacks occur because there is very much a light and dark contrast back to Gabon with this tradition. We have, believe it or not, like black magic and witchcraft going on in these modern colonially impacted forms of Bwete, where these become divination processes and trying to determine outcomes and hexing people and things. So they're antithetical to Bwete. They shouldn't even use that title because that's not what Bwete is. Bwete is not trying to determine outcomes or control people. It's about unity where there's no control required. So we do have some disparities. So essentially when I work and I follow these ancient protocols, everything from how I dress, adorn myself, dance, speak, talk with my spirit completely in this tradition and all night following these things through my King's will, there is, with that lightness, a lot of darkness. And the modern Western world cannot see if they're not in the spiritual paradigm about this good and bad situation. It's hard for them to see until they do something like this. So effectively, every time I do ceremony, the day before, I start to have all sorts of sensations. You know, the mind becomes completely different, foreign, psychologically speaking. The body will ache and swell and things. And during the ceremonial week, we are absorbing. So in my role as a Nganga Nsomba, which is a healer in my tradition, is actually, and this is the definitions from my king, right, from ancient tradition, I am to fight what is witchcraft and absorb the energies that were resultant of witchcraft. That's the delineation of my job, to deconstruct it to a Western understanding. So effectively, people have these negative energies and Iboga brings them up, right? And then they start to act out their behaviors with that particular energy. And that energy is an essence. If we're interested to explain it through the Western physics rhetoric, everything is in the electrical universe. And each individualized part of the world has an electrical reality, you know. So they're essences. We are really essences below inner gas. That's what we are. So this is how we have these forces. These forces will come and they'll be removed from the patient. When they leave, I process that, and how that's transmuted is through complete oneness and stillness. Only a man who's passive, but passively alert to all things, can actually possibly process that. And that's why my job is so important, like to put here by King, because I'm capable of doing that, albeit it gets very hard. So the person then goes away thinking, oh my God, and even the patient sees, oh, right, you're experiencing my problem. They can see that. They ask me questions. I said, yeah, but I know how to deal with that. And then they go on, and when they leave, they don't have that anymore. So the spiritual attacks will happen before and during and after the ceremonies.
You mentioned in working with spiritual attacks, something in the West, is akin to what they call exorcism, which always has kind of made me a little uncomfortable. Just in this, it just does. And I'm wondering if your process is similar to that, or if it's not sort of bogged down with the baggage of, good and evil in a sort of a Western biblical sense, but more a sort of animate forces of that aren't, satanic perhaps, or, labeled. It just seems that just seems overly violent to me, the whole exorcist process, and not healing perhaps. And maybe I'm looking at too optimistic and naive, but that's how I flow. That's how I flow. I'm not buying that. I'm not buying that, because it's almost like the priest has set up this construct that of violence and evil and something that has to be shunned, and then there's a violence that has to rip this out of the person. And I think that is, it's just like that whole thing. I just want to, I want to start another conversation. I want to heal that sort of dialogue of Western of Western exorcism. Go ahead.
I could definitely pose something very important with this. I can safely say that in our village and community, we do use an exorcism process for particular people, but it isn't in line with perhaps the Western Christian or Catholic idea of it. Not done like that at all. The exorcism, and we refer to it that, isn't done with all this hoo-ha. It's done with the use of plants to revitalize the body, and things like coating the patient in honey, right? It's very ancient things. It's things we do. And that individual allows that energy to leave. They change. I've been part of many in the village. We've had very, very heinous people come to the village with multiple personality disorder, and they'd been cannibalizing people, like really bad. So we take them and we actually restrain them, and then we rebuild them. Now, after a period of, depending on the severity, it could be a 3-month period, that person is walking around serving on his knees. And that's the miracle of what I get to see, but the West can't see. Because the West, there's no way someone that insane, number one, would be arrested or locked up. No one would care. You know, it'd be another human commodity for institutions. So, yeah, in the old way, which I can only talk from, everyone deserves the same level of compassion. And that's really lived. That's not an idea for us. It's lived. So that exorcism process, we can call it that, but I think the term's very, like as I'm suggesting, it's very loaded with Western perspectives, the term. You know, and obviously movies like The Exorcist and things when you're growing up
don't help.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually definitely a satanic, what my king would say, a satanic usage of what is God's tool, right? So different sort of approach, and people doing that sort of thing, they're promoting, like the priest is creating a narrative of evil in people that probably don't have any. That's correct. There's no spiritual diagnosis in modern Christianity, or not at all. In our society, we diagnose the person psychically, physically, mentally, and they're audited and monitored to make sure that it's done cohesively, correctly. So, yeah, the exorcism process is a real one, and if we were to reduce it in some more palatable terms for people listening, the exorcism, we need to remove our Western ideas when I refer to it out of what that is. I need to start listening and asking questions and really see that the only process that's going on there is we're trying to redeem an individual who's been taken over by this incessant ruminating mind, which we call a spiritual essence. Someone that can't stay still or constantly thinks. I think this is an entity in the body of sorts of from behavior because of indoctrination and our foods and our pollution and everything else. So we don't tend to say that's all evil. That's not something I would say. I'm saying that it's people who think they're evil who aren't following God's law, and they end up like that, right? So even us, we only deal with light, like we believe, everyone needs to go, as I said. So that's our approach to the exorcism,
Yes. And, well, let me try a different metaphor, perhaps. In Western psychology. So you could maybe discuss that in terms of, sort of the hip thing now is, internal family systems where there are parts and they have different labels of parts. And the process has some resonances with exorcism insofar as you're bringing parts back in sort of a sense of wholeness, perhaps.
Definitely, yes.
And so but yet some of the people that I've read some books on people that practice IFS that are sort of more on the fringe, talk about sort of these exile parts or parts that maybe come from external sources that are not internal, but yet that to me is another sort of issue because I think in a lot of ways that we are the human sort of ecosystem and mind, or if you want to call it that, is expansive, and it's not just a self with individual parts, but it can contain parts that are vast and coming from all different directions, somewhat similar to, spirit possession. And so how do you see that sort of, I think you kind of have an idea of what I'm talking about, but is there a way of encountering that in Bwete that perhaps is more interesting than the people in the West have encountered it?
Yeah, so in terms of putting those components or compartments into wholeness, you're referring to that?
Well, or just even the ecosystem in general, that there could be, I mean, here's me, I like to use the word ecosystem, not just a mind or a psyche or an unconscious, an ego, or I don't like any of those. I think those are much too limiting, and it's much more expansive what's going on. And even ecosystem, it could be like an extraterrestrial ecosystem too. I mean, there's a lot more going on than, these Western attempts just limit us to some, we're processes and drives, and we're much more interesting. But go ahead.
The way we see these things is people's maladies or alignments. If you look at the electrical universe, and clearly you have a timeline of yourself from birth to death, in that time when we're not given perhaps the ideas of wholeness early, necessarily we record. It's like making an electrical recording for an event that was traumatizing, right? And it stays with us, and that is an entity itself. You change from it, but it's never gone. And it has a reality of negativity, and you're still living in positivity. And really how we look, we know this very well in our tradition. What we do is we actually make the people aware of these things and try to bring wholeness back into them, right? Because they're push-pulling either side. So it's very much about reforming relationships. Iboga is considered a relationship, as everything in God's kingdom, the earth, whatever you want to call it. That's the other thing, we hear God, and I definitely grew up with this, and I'm like, this is terrible. I don't want anything to do with this, and I lived this way all my life, but that's because I'd been given a Western idea of what God is, until I discovered that the only way to know him is through me, you know what I mean? And he's unknowable, unthinkable. You can't, you just experience awareness. That's the termination, the definition we use when we refer to God. So the person, and that comes from wholeness. So the word holy, for instance, is a hint here that comes from wholeness. There's a Greek word for, I can't refer to that off the top of my head, for wholeness, and it was later broken down into the modern Western idea, right? So wholeness, the person, everything we do is about emancipation, release, whether it's spiritual, physical, mental. It's about removing these things that have been with you for all this time, to clean you, to put you back in a place of appreciation of your being and your ability to see that you're gifted life, the power of breath, a heart that pumps, that we never have to think about. It's all really a miracle when we can get whole. When you're in the wholeness, you see the miracle of what we're really doing. And we definitely work towards these relationships. So when people, for instance, in our village, families will come who are community members, and there might be some things that are unsavory going on in their family group, and King would be talking with them, resolving these things with the use of the other restorative processes, plants and treatments and things. So it's very much about relating to everything, because to us and to everyone, if you take a close look, you're in relation to everything. You're in relation to the heinous things that are going on in the world. It's all your perspective, So that's a really powerful knowledge to get people to.
You mentioned the Bwete God, and I think
Yes.
it's a little bit more expansive than sort of the Western God. And this is Mbutu.
Imbutu, yeah, that's the reconciliation of God in self. So
Oh,
the
okay.
reconstitution of his presence in one's body and mind and spirit. And we use these terms, but it's not really a he or a she. It's actually everything that you can ever perceive as one electrical ball everywhere in every universe, everything. So yeah, very much an expansive idea of that. That's right. It is about actually, primarily it's about humanity, this Ubuntu, and how that works, why it's about humanity, because once the person experiences Ubuntu, they are for humanity. They lose the I. Like I don't operate, for instance, as I or me. That's not at all. That's not how I am. I'm present, but I don't refer to myself that way. So it's a very, very unique experience to go through these things and discover that reconciliation of God and self. And it's impossible to postulate or give a perspective as to what that looks like, because it's everything we do in Bwete is orally transmuted and completely about the individual discovering who they are, and dependent upon that. So the individual is given importance only when they're sick. They're an individual because they're sick, if that makes sense. When they're healed in our village, they don't act like they did before, isolating themselves from others because of their problems. So this is what we strive to do, is make sure that people, through this reconciliation, they see that we do have a responsibility for the entire planet. Every individual all at once has responsibility for everything they see and hear, because it's all their perspective. Everything is them. So we must find mechanisms to explore this and understand and integrate this. And I work with many in mentoring roles that are on this path, right, to reconcile this constant projection of their thinking on, we see a bad event, for instance, overseas, and everyone straight away says, oh my God, and they start stressing and worrying and being sick and getting sick themselves, and then bad events happen to them. Number one, they're too addicted to the drama. They won't leave it alone. See, if everyone turned their back on these conflicts, including all of the people that run it, and you turned away and stayed sovereign, say I am, there'd be none of that. You could stop it overnight. So I try to give people these very big, expansive situations here, because they need to know that if you're saying something about something, say, that's terrible, I don't like vaccines, well, now you've just created conflict between you and them, and only through resolved unity will we heal. So many people that come here that think they're on a healing journey, they're still throwing barbs at everyone other than their community. It's very odd.
Yes.
Because this is about humanity. So our tradition knows this. We embody this, and we see everyone as equal. From our perspective, the people that, if you say that to, sometimes they think, well, I'm not equal to you, I'm this, and I've got $1 million. But that's a very, very material perspective for someone like me. I look and say, well, I'm projecting you and you're projecting me, so I don't really care what you do with that. Right? To leave the material world behind is also to understand God. And this is why these practices are strong and devout. Say with Buddhism, right? A monk doesn't go there and he's not a part-time monk, right? He doesn't go there and just jump through hoops and then go home and then be a DJ. This is not what it is. You're either a man of God, and that means your life is devoted to such.
Oh, right? Yeah. Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe DJs. Maybe Buddha would make a great DJ, though. I'm sure.
I'm sure. I mean, he is a creator of those things. He created the DJ.
Could we go back to the wonderful word you used, and I think it's going to become my new favorite word, reconciliation.
Right.
And I don't use that word enough. And so the word that's used and thrown around too much that I don't like is integration. And to me, that means somebody's
I agree.
to
I
me,
agree.
to me, that means somebody's trying to sell you something. But anyway,
Exactly.
we
Yeah,
can,
you need to integrate. You
yeah,
need to
we could,
integrate, and
yeah,
I'll
exactly.
charge you $100 for an hour of it of
Uh,
that.
yeah, for your
Yeah.
integration session. Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's like
Yes.
it. Meanwhile, I'll exercise you for the problem that you don't have until I know you have it.
Yeah.
But
That's right.
anyway, can we go back to Imbudu and reconciliation? Because I want to sort of feel into that a little bit more. That because you're pointing to that as like divinity reconciliation, which I love. I mean, there's something about that I really like. Um, Something sacred.
Yes. Yeah. The reconciliation. When I first heard that in this tradition, it really echoed because I was involved with Indigenous Australians, Aboriginals, and their mythologies and law. And I could really resonate with this reconciliation because there's stories in our dream time in Australia where there was a period in time. And by the way, many people have mapped this period in time from different directions, including neurologists. There was a time where the individual fell separate from the wholeness, natural progression actually in the universe, right? So when they fell, the gods left because they're not speaking to them. And what are the gods? That's, I'm talking the myth, but what the gods are is what the Aboriginals meant is not that there was a physical God that moved away. He's saying because you turned your back, you can't see him anymore. More so through the severance. So this is, I had that background. So when I heard Ubuntu for the first time through my journey in Bwete, I completely understood that this nature is, and the Aboriginals love that term in Australia too, because they're not, if you look at reconciliation, it means I was previously something and I see that and I'd like to be that. You know, it's not reform, it's not these other things. It's a relationship, you know, that you're building, which makes it very beautiful. I understand. I love the term myself, and we're proud to promote that theory. And obviously, we have a rhetoric because we come from. I can talk about this. We come from a cultural diversity that's specific, but people need to see that in African spiritualities, of which I'm affiliated with, many people I'm in contact with, all these people have the one direction of unity. They're all promoting what I'm saying. They're all saying God himself and we are the stars and everything else, right? So there's the same directive no matter what is going on in Africa, but it's expressed contextually through different weavings and colors they wear and songs they sing, but they're all the same. It's just a cultural diversity. So I pose that because here I am, and I'm coming from a very ancient process, and I know how that can be seen. But I'm actually trying to make people know that my terminology of God himself and everything is not a Western idea. It's about you. If I talk that way, I'm talking to the patient that you are him. You have to start acting his way. And what his way is just nature's laws. Like we don't go and poison the oceans. We don't go, obvious things. So, sometimes we understand our particular cultural expression can be misconstrued into something very occultish and dominating and everything else. I watch that a lot with individuals who come. They have dubiousness because they've been grown up in a very negative environment with Christianity. So they have this skepticism, and the church has cleverly programmed this in everyone, that there's evil everywhere and that people are going to do something wrong. It's just really bad. So therefore, when they hear anything to do with what I'm talking about, they're going, holy shit, I don't want that, sometimes. But the people that really hear are the ones we're interested in, when they come to understand us, they know that what we talk is just our particular expression of a universal process.
Can you? I'm still. I still am trying to sink into this Aboriginal reconciliation, but about turning your back. And can you maybe walk me through that again?
Yes. So definitely. So if people listening or anything, or even yourself, we have processional astronomy, which many people will know. It's a record of the heavens, per se, of the movement of the planets, the processional movement of the planets. There's a wobble, a degree that occurs in the universe, and each time one of these happens, you can map the changes in dynamics by looking at our history. It was novelty starts to happen around these different changes. Now, the ancients are including us, we're very wired to that knowledge, which is quite a secret for people who have to earn the right to use it. But when you know those things, you can start to understand, for instance, and really use geometry. It's like it gets so amazing that I can divine things in Australia in random places and find old tools and things. So it's like a dowsing type of effect. So effectively this turning the back, you mentioned that back there, the turning your back on all of that knowledge. And then it becomes about a material reach towards things that aren't of God's needs anymore, elaborate things. So it's neither a good or bad thing from our perspective. It's just it's an awareness thing. If that makes sense. If people truly saw the old way, the golden era, we always like to refer to these processional astronomical cycles of golden periods in our society, when things like the Angkor Wat was built and the Giza pyramids, clearly that was an age where the individual was whole because he's using sciences that our fragmentary science cannot approach. This is how they build with such precision. There's such wholeness. So there's a period where we've descended from that, and you could refer to Vedic processional astronomy and movement. This is one of 5 processional cycles that repeat, and the lowest, debauched, most severance period is now Kali Yuga, they call it, Brahmanists and everything else. It's the same. We interpret that differently, and Hopis that I'm in contact with have the same story but with different context. So this lower form, lower vibration of which we're living in is a really tricky world to be in at this time if we look at the grand scheme of processional movement. So really there was a period where the person processionally aligned with the heavens changed the psychology. So the manufacture or the evolution occurs at processional alignments in ancient knowledge. So we are, in other words, there is one of many, and the whole universe above you is you. It is actually giving you the very capacity to breathe. And clearly anyone could see that now. If anyone asks the question, how are they breathing? Or how does your heart work? No one can answer that. But we can as spiritualists, because we know the whole essence of what gives life to all things in the electrical universe. Tesla was telling us about these things, even from a Western perspective. So really, I understand with our work that, people come to reconcile and have themselves turn inward towards themselves, which is the nature of our ceremonial practice here, is called Mboka A Nzambe, which is God's universal mirror. And there are mirrors used in ceremony. So it's about the individual turning inward on self, paying far more attention to self, because they're always in their head, not thinking or paying attention to how they brush their teeth, how they eat. They're distracted. The whole Western world is distracted, so that's a real outcome. People come to discover that, and when they turn inward on this Mboka A Nzambe, then they see themselves in a new light, and that enables them to actually Iboga to bring up the particular events of their life in front of them, and they can actually see it for what it is. And I'm trying to describe something indescribable, by the way, but it's a universal process here. People have that realization and then realize their presence. They think, okay, I'm here, and that problem is no longer existing. That's healing. That's wholeness. So the person is restored, and that restoration, no matter how we postulate it or call it, is reconciliation of God and self. You're now become aware that you are the problem, that all your thinking is the problem. No one's ever given you bad thinking. So that's a powerful moment for people, because we've been, including me when I first started, because I've been victimized all my life, So now, not at all. Everything's me, and I've got no conflict with anything. So that's what we work towards. So that's pretty much an explanation of like what the Aboriginals are implying. It's the same thing, that the individual is now focused on what we call as spiritually very materialist perspectives, very intoxicated with their environment. Whereas we're not. We're gently aware of all things and walk anywhere without reaction or always a smile. And that is what I wish for everyone. I wish, that's why I work so tirelessly here, because I truly believe, and I've had exceptional outcomes for people, truly to discover that peace and freedom, that responsibility, that every problem I've had is me thinking about it. Nothing higher. And I have many that have achieved that, when really in the beginning I thought, no, they're not going to. Perhaps they won't get there. So I'm always astounded at this process, and that's really what we're trying to do, is reconcile people with themselves, which is God. The God experience is when you're reconciled with the self, really.
Can you maybe talk a little bit about Mboka A Nzambe, or I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, in terms of you mentioned sort of the outcomes you've had for people, but maybe just like what that's like as a first step, or the practice or the rituals that people can expect when they get there to Costa Rica. And I eventually want to ask you why the move to Costa Rica as opposed to Africa, but maybe that can wait. But maybe that can wait.
No, that can be pretty brief. It's fairly brief. Costa Rica has, number one, for our plant, legality. So it has a neutral response to that. So I'm doing things, number one, and I'm also needing to be who I am, aligned with the equator, which is the homeland in Gabon. So my proximity to the equator is important also. So I lost my train of thought. I apologize. Could you please tell me?
Yeah, I kind of embedded two questions in one, which isn't fair, but that's how I roll sometimes.
That's fine. I should be able to
go. Why the move to Costa Rica from Gabon, and or sort of the maybe as a first step of the ritual of the
yes,
process.
Okay, thank you very much.
People arrive there.
Yes, so attending Mboka A Nzambe at Ikara here, which is a Western outreach of our non-for-profit Mboka A Nzambe in Gabon. So we run our lives the same way here, albeit in a far more luxurious location. It's very different. So, basically when people come, I will talk with them on the phone, and I'll have really that's the pre-integration. I know you don't like that term, neither do I, but for lack of better terms, this is actually calibrating them.
Pre-reconciliation.
Yeah, pre-reconciliation. There we go. We use that one. So pre-reconciliation, I'm gauging their their capacity to embrace the teaching. And over time, working with the Iboga as I do every day, and this, you develop what my brothers have in the village is a psychic capacity to deal with the person, right? Because I do this all day long, and basically that's a very important part of the spiritual diagnosis. When someone's on the phone with me, I can already tell whether it's too soon or too late for them for now. And that, therefore, if there's any of that, we don't just take them. We say you need to sit out and rest. It's not good for your timing, because that person might be trying to escape from something, and we don't want them doing that, because this process is about acceptance. So basically, it starts with these conversations and explaining where they're going, because they're coming to somewhere that isn't a retreat center per se, albeit we use those terminologies for social media platforms. It's a spiritual hospital, really, where they're coming. So they need to have this understanding of where we're coming from, so they can feel the immersion and the spiritual elements which really add for their response. So once the person arrives here, once they've gone through these screening processes and things, when they come, we have rituals such as spiritually cleansing the body with solution of different plants and washing the person. So before I contact them physically, I must apply this process. So they arrive, they wash with the solution, they're then greeted by us, and then we start the process. And basically in our process, we have 2 ceremonies in that 5-day period, which are all in line with some of the days, the amount of days in Africa with the processes. So those 2 ceremonies are different in a lot of ways. The first ceremony, the person is using, after ingesting Iboga and going through the various rituals of cleanliness before starting, they're then sitting in front of an image of our king, Adumangana. And at this moment, my king, Adumangana, has their photograph at that moment. And we start to work to contain the space. So our whole ceremony in the beginning is just about containment. From our perspective, spiritually, we want people to be comfortable, right? And this is how it is. There's protection in our imagery and a sharing between you and I, because after all, the patient's coming and asking for something from us. So there needs to be a reciprocity there as well with the image. So they go through that for about an hour or so, whilst there's dancing and music going on. Our music is very unique and very ancient. So basically after that, they're resting after a period of time. So the major part of the ceremony finishes. That person's then able to go and rest. And when they're resting, they're not sleeping. They're actually now looking inward on self, because that process that I've just delivered with looking at King's image, for instance, is locking you in at turning your attention on self, because looking at one thing, it's just about you, right? So this is very important, so they can become observant with the Iboga. Awareness is very important, to be neutral in your approach to it. So when you have sensations and things in your body, most people start to worry, right? Because they're not used to those things. But that's why we work so hard in cleaning them and getting them comfortable, because when you worry about those things, you don't learn what Iboga is doing. What it's doing, and its intelligence. You can feel it moving around the body and going to certain areas if you're remaining neutral and not getting involved with thinking about it. So we really much help you during the ceremony to make sure that you're not getting caught up in thought loops or rumination or trying to determine something, because that's all an outward expression of something that isn't occurring in that moment. It blinds us to what Iboga is going to teach, this constant projection. So that ceremony, when that ends, we have a gap day in between and before the second ceremony on the Wednesday evening. And with this particular ceremony, they're now using a mirror. They've been contained with the imagery, and people will report during that night with the imagery. They all see power animals to do with our king on the exact limbs, but they know nothing of this. All of them, 100% of people see these images in his image, whether that might be a meaning of a lion or an elephant or anything else. It's all to do with Bwete, which demonstrates some spiritual power. So the second time they're in a mirror and they're looking at self. And lo and behold, if one sits long enough and looks in the mirror and is also astute enough or acutely aware of that process, they'll see that staring at that one image of you, all mind ceases. There's nothing to think about, right? There's just you. So it's very much a reflection. So from there, while they're using the mirror, there is use of torches like flame and purification things going on around them and dance. And this is to keep them contained and safe. My job is to have my presence all around the temple space, right? Keeping it strong, all the corners, everything. So working at a high intensity for a reason, because with high intensity, there's more electrical atmosphere and more of God's essence. So that individual, after going through that, goes to lie down, and they're supremely more dialed into looking at the self, because they've been sitting on this thing for an hour with Iboga and other plants. And it enables us to, while you're focused as well on the mirror, we're removing things that would not be able to be removed if you were paying attention to them. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah, so that's really the ceremonial process. And in between, after a ceremony, there's a duration of time where the person is processing. I don't like using that term either, Michael. I hear it a lot.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear it so much. They're looking at themselves, right? They're forced to look at themselves. The Iboga doesn't allow you to sleep straight away because it has plans for you to become more aware and realize that Iboga, when you're on it, and this has been done clinically, while you're awake, the brain is mimicking a theta state on Iboga. So although you're wide awake and saying to yourself, I need to sleep, your brain is in theta, and it's doing exactly what happens when you're sleeping of a nighttime. So that's a really, really important thing, right? So Iboga takes care of this process. So while they're awake, they're experiencing this reflection, per se, some of the debris from the ceremony, perhaps a spiky instance of their life, or a trauma, or anything at all, or a rumination of thought, depends on the individual. Either way, the problem is now very much on display for a very good reason. Only with its presence can it actually be almost electrocuted from the cell memory of the body, which Iboga is flooding the body with a completely different pitch and vibration, right? So it's actually allowing a difference and cleaning the person. So really, when we've finished with this in the week, there's not a lot of time in the week here that allows for, waterfall excursions or any of these things. It's about the person's health and learning to be with themselves as well, because even the most, lonely type people, even those guys, when they're on Iboga and in this room, they're really alone, and it can be strong. Because for now, the electrical movement is contained and brought away any of these material attachments. So this is where my job at assisting people to understand is highly important with Iboga. So during that day of process, I'll be working with the patient without sleep as long as they need it, to actually guide them into navigating and directing themselves rather than turning away from what was bad, looking at it and realizing that, yes, that was then and this is now. So really, in a nutshell, I'm constantly teaching, really, during that day, people how to just be aware and accept what's going on. Acceptance is everything. Acceptance is a lost cause in the West. No one accepts much at all now, in true acceptance. So true acceptance allows you to accept even the worst things, in other words. Someone does something bad somewhere, well, I couldn't care less. And people would say to me, that's being cold. And I said, no, only to you. It's called compassion for a spiritualist, to allow people to go through their relative constructs. And sure, some people are, not some, a lot are victimized, exactly. But in spiritual perspective, we firmly believe that we choose our existences. So there's a different, when you're a spiritualist, you know different things and you approach things very differently. So here I'm really in this week just trying to not bombard people with all of this stuff. It doesn't have to go so far. It's more about them just learning not to attach to the nonsense that happens in their mind. Just leave it alone. Don't do anything about it. If you don't act on it, don't do anything, eventually it becomes dissolved. It dissolves. And then another thought comes in. So really they're learning an art form of thought, and it's incredible power. For instance, thoughts so strong that it'll make genocides happen. That's like terrible, right? That's a tyrannical mind. So yeah, we want the person to have this ability to deal with their waking state. So the whole idea is they're training to go home and contact their entire movements in a different fashion. And this is what they do. They go home and they have different perspectives about everything. Perhaps a partner was being difficult. Now they're not so much. Perhaps the work was, you're complaining about your work all the time. Now you think, no, I might stay. That happens pretty much all the time with me here with my patients. They don't go and run and become something that they're not with Iboga. No, they actually go back, and because it's so earthing, Iboga is the only plant on the planet that works in the root and the crown simultaneously. There isn't any like that. And that allows a person to be sitting and realizing what we call the God, kingdom of heaven on earth, God's kingdom. When they're sitting still, you'll see that everything's you. You can put your feet up, throw the burdens on creation and let go of the conflict, So we're very proud. We get people completely changed, like amazing things, everything from Parkinson's disease through to addiction. And that wasn't because Iboga is good for addiction. I'll explain this. What it was it connected them to a wholeness that they couldn't see. That's all Iboga does. And then all of a sudden they see things differently, like, oh, I know I shouldn't be doing that. So it's really aligning with the principles of what we embody in Bwete. So everything we do actually is in Bwete, like in Bwete, the music, dance, everything is reconciliation. Doing things for yourself. And in Bwete we have a thing, kukamalele, which means a pure joy. And when we're dancing in big ceremonies and things, say in my case with my brothers or my wife, with the sisters, there's no emotional tone. There's a neutrality with our people. They're very, very indifferent towards things. They're very astute. They watch very carefully without judgment or definition, right? And basically what that allows is a quiet mind. It means they have a quiet mind. So when ceremony comes, we experience pure joy, because from a quiet mind, and I know this personally, you will have ecstatic joy without thinking about happiness or anything else. The mind is to go quiet, for you to be happy. People want happiness, but they don't realize that they're already happy. So, it's kind of an interesting process. I love to see people doing this. And that's why I do it. They become, like I'm imparting everything that I took far too long to learn. I accumulated knowledge and tried all these things. But I have people come here without any of that and achieve what took me years in the week that I treat them. Because I finally landed. I paved the way and learned the hard way, and then became fully spiritualized and seeing the truth. Now my dedication to humanity is to give them every single bit of encouragement to learn this power of self, this contained person, like this person that's impervious to negativity, that doesn't get drawn into knee-jerk reactions, that's not compelled, that's not envious, greedy, jealous, nothing. It just accepts everyone as everything. And that is freedom. At the end of the day, everyone in healing is looking for freedom, but they don't often realize that what it means is a complete dissolution of anything material that you constantly follow, which is not for everyone's cup of tea. That's why you have monks and you have, say in my case, Bwete. But if you look at some of the other Bwete around the West, I won't go along this for too long, but you'll see it's very part-time, right? And that's fine because there's just money involved, but that's not really embodying the true principle. And from the true principle, energy takes care of the patients. If someone's acting in line with what is sacred in the tradition and sacred to Iboga. So we are very different in that way, who we are and what we do and what we see for humanity. And I love seeing people become more impervious to previous triggers. Like I get calls all the time saying, oh my God, I didn't understand much of what you were saying when I was there, Kuma. But I've gone home and in 2 weeks I've watched my behavior or attitude. And he said, I have this innate ability now to not get engaged with someone trying to spike me. Whereas before they were constantly fighting. And I love that. That's a win. That's God. That's God taking responsibility for what you are.
Kuma, if somebody is interested in participating in your programs in the center down there, how would you recommend they do that and connect with you?
Yeah, for sure. If they're coming this way, how they get in contact with me? You mean?
Right. Or if they want to be connected with your offerings and ceremonies.
Yes, for sure. So obviously we have an online presence and everything else, and we make ourselves freely available to all people. I am considered a missionary of sorts in my tradition too, which has Western connotations, but the true missionary is serving humanity. So he's saying everyone deserves the same right from our perspective. So that's how I work. So therefore I'm available for people all of the time that ring me to talk. So I encourage dialogue with people too. If they've seen us and thought that's intriguing, but I'm not sure, they need to understand that there's no obligation to ring someone like me because we're not motivated by money. We don't sell Iboga or Bwete. That's against the tradition, which many people are breaking that rule, all of them. So we're about humanity, getting that person adjusted and cleaned. And basically we make ourselves available so they can find contacts with us. And even here, if they wanted to reach out, Ikara at ikararetreat.com, Ikara, is a good source of very spiritual perspectives on our tradition and accurate depictions of what it is. Very different from the proliferation of information about Bwete online, which is very much constructed for Western audience. We're actually coming from a very pure angle, so they can come there and also contact me without obligation. You ring and I talk freely on the line with people all day. And some may never be coming here. They just want to know what this is about. So very much that's how we make ourselves accessible to people, for sure. And some people are amazed when I ring them back straight away after they've been following me on a talk or something. They go, oh, my God, I didn't expect you to call. So, yeah, that's what I do. That's my job. So, yeah, I'm very proud of that too, because I feel, once again, my motivation with that is that Munga and I, my wife and I, we're motivated by humanity. Once again, humanity is a relationship between your fellow man. And that's the primary. And we don't allow things to come in and degrade that. So I encourage anyone with any interest. It could be to do with the tradition, could be to do with the use of Iboga. It doesn't matter. I'm freely available to give you the Babongo perspective, which the Babongo people, who are our people, originate the use of Bwete and Iboga. It comes from us. It was given to other Bantu nations from us, right? And the practice changed, but we still practice this pure form. from its beginning here through Mboka A Nzambe and Ikara here.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, Kuma. I appreciate your time, and I encourage everybody to check out your Instagram page that has reels and sort of more illustrative representations of what you were wonderful enough to share with us. And may it all lead to our reconciliation. And thank you for that wonderful gift today of that word and that sort of relationship.
Yeah, I really appreciate being given this platform with you, Michael. Thank you very much, because I take it very seriously, these opportunities, because we really desperately want to share another way, a free way of not being in our current maladies to others. Everyone deserves it. So that's our motivation there. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.